There are pickup trucks out there so rare that most people think they're fake when they see them. Some of these trucks had only a handful ever made, and now they've vanished like they never existed at all. You're about to discover 20 of the rarest pickup trucks that have completely disappeared from the roads. These aren't just uncommon vehicles. These are trucks that were so limited, so exclusive, or so experimental that finding one today is like discovering buried treasure. And the stories behind why they vanished will shock you more than their rarity. Let's start with something that sounds like a joke but was completely real, the 1957 Ford Courier. No, not the small truck from the 1970s. This was a full-size pickup that Ford built for exactly 1 year and then pretended it never happened. Only about 21,000 were made, but here's the crazy part. Almost none of them survived. The 1957 Courier was Ford's attempt to compete with Chevrolet's Cameo Carrier. It had a fiberglass bed instead of steel, smooth sides instead of the usual ridge design, and chrome trim that made it look more like a car than a truck. Ford thought they had a winner, but truck buyers hated it. They wanted trucks that looked like trucks, not pretty show vehicles. What makes this truck so rare today isn't just the low production numbers. It's that most owners were embarrassed to own them. Farmers and construction workers didn't want a truck that looked like it belonged in a car show. So many of these trucks were either converted back to regular pickup beds or just scrapped entirely. Finding one today is almost impossible. The 1956 Dodge Sweptside is another truck that disappeared because it was too fancy for its own good. Dodge built this truck for 2 years, 1957 and 1958, but they made so few that most people have never seen one. The Sweptside had fins, chrome, and styling that looked like it came from a space movie. Only about 1,500 Sweptsides were built total, and most of them have vanished without a trace. The problem was the same as the Ford Courier. Truck buyers didn't want something that looked like a rocket ship. They wanted work trucks, not showpieces. The few Sweptsides that survived are now worth more than most people's houses. But here's where things get really interesting. The 1958 Chevrolet Cameo Carrier Apache was the truck that started this whole fancy pickup trend, and it's almost as rare as the trucks that copied it. Chevrolet built about 5,000 of these trucks, but finding one today is like finding a unicorn. The Apache Cameo had a fiberglass bed, smooth sides, and enough chrome to blind someone in direct sunlight. It was beautiful, but it was also expensive and impractical. The fiberglass bed cracked easily, the chrome rusted, and the whole thing was more trouble than it was worth. Most owners eventually gave up and bought regular trucks. Now, let's talk about something truly bizarre, the 1961 Chevrolet Corvair Rampside. This wasn't just a rare truck, it was a truck that defied everything people thought they knew about pickup design. The Corvair Rampside had its engine in the back, a side-loading ramp instead of a tailgate, and handling that would make most drivers seasick. Chevrolet built the Rampside for 4 years, from 1961 to 1964, but they only made about 18,000 total. The truck was ahead of its time in some ways and completely wrong in others. The side-loading ramp was actually pretty smart for certain jobs, but the rear engine layout made the truck unstable when loaded. Most Rampside owners quickly discovered that the truck was dangerous to drive with a load. The rear engine design meant that putting weight in the bed made the front end so light that steering became almost impossible. Add in the fact that the air-cooled engine overheated constantly, and you had a recipe for disaster. The 1963 Studebaker Champ was another truck that disappeared because the company that made it disappeared. Studebaker was dying by 1963, and the Champ was their last desperate attempt to stay alive in the truck market. They built maybe 2,000 of these trucks before giving up entirely. The Champ was actually a pretty good truck, but it came from a company that everyone knew was going out of business. Dealers didn't want to sell them, customers didn't want to buy them, and parts were impossible to find. Most Champs were scrapped when they broke down because fixing them was more expensive than buying a new Ford or Chevrolet. Here's one that will blow your mind: the 1964 Jeep Gladiator Thriftside. This wasn't just rare, it was a truck that Jeep built for people who wanted a pickup but didn't want it to look like a pickup. The Thriftside had a bed that was integrated into the body, smooth sides, and styling that looked more like a station wagon than a truck. Jeep only built about 3,000 Thriftside models, and most of them have vanished completely. The problem was that the truck was confused about what it wanted to be. It wasn't tough enough for serious work, but it wasn't comfortable enough for daily driving. It fell into a gap between markets and never found its audience. The 1968 Dodge A108 pickup is another truck that disappeared because it was too weird for its own good. This was basically a van with the back cut off to make a pickup bed. It had a forward control design, which meant the driver sat over the front wheels, and the whole thing looked like something from a science fiction movie. Dodge built the A108 for several years, but they made so few that exact production numbers are hard to find. The truck was popular with some commercial users because it could carry more cargo and a shorter wheelbase, but regular truck buyers stayed away. The driving position was uncomfortable, the visibility was terrible, and the whole thing felt like you were driving a refrigerator. Now, let's talk about the 1969 International Scout 800A pickup. International made thousands of regular Scouts, but the pickup version was so rare that most people don't even know it existed. The Scout pickup had a small bed behind the cab, but it was still a two-door vehicle, which made it almost useless for most truck buyers. International only built the Scout pickup for a couple of years, and they made maybe 1,000 total. The truck was caught between markets. It was too small for serious work, but too truck-like for family use. Most buyers chose either a regular Scout or a full-size pickup instead. The 1970 Plymouth Road Runner Pickup is one of the rarest trucks ever made, but for a completely different reason. Plymouth never actually built a Road Runner pickup. These were all conversions done by dealers or custom shops. Only about 100 were ever made, and most of them have disappeared completely. The Road Runner pickup was created by taking a regular Plymouth pickup and adding Road Runner graphics, a performance engine, and muscle car styling cues. The result was a truck that could run with the best muscle cars of the era, but it was also completely impractical for truck work. Most owners eventually converted them back to regular pickups or sold them to collectors. Here's another one that's almost impossible to find: the 1971 Chevrolet El Camino SS 454. While regular El Caminos were fairly common, the SS 454 version was built in tiny numbers. Chevrolet only made about 5,000 of these trucks, and most of them have vanished without a trace. The El Camino SS 454 was basically a muscle car with a truck bed. It had a massive 454 cubic inch engine, performance suspension, and enough power to embarrass most sports cars. But it was also expensive, impractical, and came out just as the muscle car era was ending. Most owners either wrecked them or sold them when gas prices went up. The 1972 Dodge Ramcharger pickup is another truck that disappeared because it was ahead of its time. This wasn't the SUV version of the Ramcharger. This was a pickup truck with a removable top. Dodge built maybe 500 of these trucks, and finding one today is almost impossible. The Ramcharger pickup was actually a pretty cool idea. You could remove the top for open-air driving, but you still had a truck bed for hauling cargo. The problem was that the removable top was heavy, difficult to remove, and leaked like a sieve. Most owners eventually gave up and bought regular trucks. Now, let's talk about something really special: the 1973 Ford Courier Rotary. This was a small pickup truck with a rotary engine, and it was so rare that most people think it's a myth. Ford built maybe 100 of these trucks as test vehicles, but they never went into production. The Courier Rotary was Ford's attempt to compete with Japanese small trucks using rotary engine technology. The rotary engine was smooth, powerful, and compact, but it was also unreliable and drank gas like a full-size truck. Ford quickly realized that the rotary engine wasn't ready for production vehicles. The 1974 Chevrolet Love Mighty Mike is another truck that disappeared because it was trying to be something it wasn't. The Love was a small Japanese truck that Chevrolet imported and rebadged. The Mighty Mike was a performance version with graphics, special wheels, and a slightly more powerful engine. Chevrolet built the Mighty Mike for 2 years, but they made so few that exact numbers are unknown. The truck was caught between markets. It was too small for serious work, but too truck-like for the performance market. Most buyers chose either a regular Love or a full-size Chevrolet instead. The 1975 Dodge Warlock is a truck that's legendary among collectors, but almost no one has ever seen one. Dodge built the Warlock for 3 years, but they made so few that finding one today is like winning the lottery. The Warlock was a performance truck with special graphics, wheels, and suspension. Only about 2,000 Warlocks were built total, and most of them have vanished without a trace. The truck was expensive, impractical, and came out during the worst of the 1970s fuel crisis. Most owners eventually gave up and bought more practical vehicles. Here's one that will surprise you: the 1976 Ford Bronco pickup. Most people know the Bronco as an SUV, but Ford also built a pickup version for 1 year only. The Bronco pickup had a small bed behind the cab, but it was still based on the SUV platform. Ford built maybe 1,000 Bronco pickups, and most of them have disappeared completely. The truck was too small for serious work, but too truck-like for family use. It fell into the same gap that caught so many other specialty trucks of the era. The 1977 Chevrolet Blazer K5 pickup is another truck that existed for just 1 year. Chevrolet took their popular K5 Blazer SUV and created a pickup version with a small bed. The result was a truck that looked cool, but wasn't very practical. Chevrolet built about 2,000 Blazer pickups, but most of them have vanished without a trace. The truck had all the disadvantages of both an SUV and a pickup, with none of the advantages of either. Most owners quickly traded them in for more practical vehicles. The 1978 Dodge Macho Power Wagon is a truck that's so rare that most people think it's a joke name. But Dodge really did build a truck called the Macho, and it was one of the most over-the-top vehicles of the 1970s. The Macho had massive graphics, special wheels, and enough chrome to blind someone. Dodge built the Macho for 2 years, but they made so few that exact numbers are hard to find. The truck was expensive, impractical, and came out during a time when most people were buying economy cars. Most Machos were either wrecked by their owners or scrapped when they became unfashionable. The 1979 International Scout Terra pickup is another truck that disappeared because the company that made it disappeared. International was struggling by 1979, and the Scout Terra was their last attempt to compete in the pickup market. They built maybe 3,000 of these trucks before giving up entirely. The Scout Terra was actually a pretty good truck, but it came from a company that everyone knew was in trouble. Dealers didn't want to sell them, customers didn't want to buy them, and parts were impossible to find. Most Terras were scrapped when they broke down because fixing them was more expensive than buying a new truck. Finally, let's talk about the 1980 Chevrolet Love Street Machine. This was the last of the special edition small trucks, and it was so rare that most people have never heard of it. The Street Machine was a performance version of the Love with special graphics, wheels, and suspension. Chevrolet built the Street Machine for 1 year only, and they made maybe 500 total. The truck was caught between the end of the performance era and the beginning of the economy era. Most buyers chose either regular trucks or economy cars instead. So what happened to all these rare trucks? Why did they disappear without a trace? The answer is complicated, but it comes down to a few key factors. First, many of these trucks were built in such small numbers that they never had a chance to establish themselves in the market. When you only build 500 or 1,000 of something, it's easy for them to just disappear over time. Second, many of these trucks were experimental or specialty vehicles that didn't fit into normal market categories. They were too weird for most buyers, too impractical for work use, and too expensive for casual buyers. They fell into gaps between markets and never found their audience. Third, many of these trucks came from companies that were struggling or dying. When Studebaker, International, and other companies went out of business, their trucks became orphans. Without dealer support or parts availability, most owners eventually gave up and bought something else. Fourth, many of these trucks were ahead of their time or behind their time. They either introduced concepts that the market wasn't ready for, or they clung to concepts that the market had already rejected. Either way, they didn't find buyers. But here's the really sad part. Many of these trucks were actually pretty good vehicles. They had innovative features, interesting designs, or performance capabilities that were ahead of their time. If they had been built by larger companies, or if they had been introduced at different times, they might have been successful. The problem is that the truck market has always been conservative. Truck buyers want reliability, practicality, and proven performance. They don't want experiments, specialty vehicles, or anything that's too different from what they're used to. This conservatism has killed many potentially great trucks over the years. Today, finding any of these trucks is almost impossible. They're so rare that most collectors have never seen them in person. When one does show up at an auction or a car show, it creates a sensation because so few people have ever seen one before. The few examples that do survive are worth incredible amounts of money. A 1957 Ford Courier in good condition can sell for more than a new luxury truck. A 1956 Dodge Sweptside can bring six figures at auction. These trucks have become some of the most valuable vehicles in the collector market. But their real value isn't monetary, it's historical. These trucks represent roads not taken, ideas that didn't work out, and experiments that failed. They show us what might have been if the market had been different, if timing had been better, or if companies had been willing to take bigger risks. They also remind us that the truck market we have today isn't inevitable. It's the result of thousands of decisions, successes, and failures over decades. These rare trucks are the fossils of automotive evolution. They show us the species that didn't survive. The tragedy is that we'll never know what the truck market might have looked like if some of these vehicles had succeeded. Would we have smaller, more efficient trucks if the Corvair Rampside had worked? Would we have more innovative designs if the Sweptside had been accepted? Would we have more performance trucks if the Road Runner Pickup had been successful? These are questions we'll never be able to answer because these trucks disappeared without a trace. They exist now only in old magazines, faded photographs, and the memories of the few people who are lucky enough to see them in person. But maybe that's part of what makes them so fascinating. They represent the mystery of what might have been, the romance of the road not taken, and the eternal human desire to build something different, something special, something that's never been done before. Check out our next video to discover the most expensive truck mistakes that cost manufacturers millions.